بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد. So we're continuing in our series on the Fiqh of food and drink. And last week we were talking about some enzymes, specifically rennet, and we ended with the discussion on whey products. So inshallah, the next couple of lessons, or maybe this one and next week, we'll finish the other enzymes that you can find in the food. And there are many of them, but we'll try to group them, inshallah. That way it becomes easier to remember the rule. And the final conclusion. Today, inshallah, we'll begin, hopefully we'll do 4 of them, with one of these enzymes referred to as L-cysteine. L-cysteine. Sometimes it comes with letter E in front of it. L-cysteine. And this is a particular enzyme you find in baked goods, particularly bread. So if you go to the dictionary definition, L-cysteine is an amino acid used to extend the shelf life of food, particularly factory-made bread, bagels, croissants, cake, donuts, pita bread, and etc. So it affects most of the bakery industry. It has to be baked goods, i.e. usually in baked goods or pastries. And the reason why they say factory made is because if you went to an artisan bakery, like a regular bakery, homemade yourself, or those bakeries where the person who's baking it is not a big scale, they don't put it into their food. So factory made, because factory on when you buy it, regular bread, you want it to stay for a long time. Now, the problem with L-cysteine, why the issue comes, is because of the sources. So the sources for L-cysteine is the following. Number 1, human hair. And this is what most people have concern, human hair. Secondly, duck feathers. Thirdly, cow horns. Fourth, pig bristles or pig hair. And lastly, synthetic/plant-based. So the ones that are of concern, as we can tell, is the human hair, and then pig hair or bristles, and the other ones, then we could mention them separately. And it's usually an additive put in the dough. Like we said, when they're making the dough, they put this into it. Then, what's the hukum? What's the ruling on this enzyme? And the reason why it's important is because some people, of course, I think most people eat bread, they're concerned about this. And some people raise the question that the bagels you get anywhere has L-cysteine or the bread in there. So the hukum, the ruling on this is dependent on the source. And so what we'll do is that we'll cover each ruling based on the source, wherever it comes from, and therefore that you can get the clarity. Because to give one hukum for all of it, it's not fair. It's not correct. Every ruling has to have every source has its own ruling because each source is different. For example, if you said it's synthetic, which is the first example we'll take, ruling on L-cysteine from synthetic sources or plant-based, there's no ishkal, no doubt. Halal. It's halal. Because it comes from plant-based sources, or if it's synthetic in the lab. Now, sometimes synthetic doesn't mean always halal if they took it from a haram source, but that's not what synthetic usually means. Usually synthetic means they made it in the lab to avoid the animals altogether. So if we have L-cysteine in our bread and it comes from synthetic sources, nobody has a problem with it. Even the vegans are okay with it. The next one then is, what if it comes from duck feathers, goose feathers, or any animal which is halal? Now somebody might think when I said that, goose feathers. What's the hukum on the goose? Who can tell us? What's the ruling on a goose? Okay, first of all, you're not supposed to eat it. In Canada, I think it's illegal, Allahu A'lam, to kill the goose or anything like it. Just talking about just the ruling, without us going beside that animal. What's the ruling on a goose? And no one can tell us, based on what we covered from the lessons before. Halal. It's halal. Why? Because we don't have any reason to make it tahrim by wasf. Does the goose have talons or horns or no, doesn't have that, doesn't have this. He doesn't do any kind of predatory behavior. And in fact, there's some narration that show that some of the Sahaba, they ate the goose, or maybe swan is the better translation. So we have nas too, so it's halal. So if it comes from a goose, or geese, or duck, or animals that are halal, then the ruling is it's halal. Now, the first thing is somebody needs to know is that we're talking about the feathers. So there's a ruling on the animal, the ruling on the feathers. So if we say, for example, L-cysteine comes from the feathers of geese and duck, فَهُوَ halal. Because in fiqh, we know the animals which are halal to eat, and even some animals which died as dead meat, it's a more correct view, the feathers, the fur and the wool is halal of that animal. It's a principle, it's a qa'idah. Animal which is halal to eat, the feathers and fur and wool that come from it, فَهُوَ halal. What about if it died by itself? Even then, more correct opinion, the wool and the feathers still halal, even though the animal is haram. And there's proof for that, but we won't get into it. Imam al-Nawawi, he writes, Imam al-Nawawi, in Rawd al-Talibin, volume 1, page 15, that the origin is that which is taken from an animal which is halal to eat, i.e., like its suf, like the wool, and the fur, and the rish, and the feathers, فَكُلَّهَا طَاهِرَةٌ بِالْإِجْمَاعِ. All of it is pure by ijma', whether it's plucked or it flew away by itself. Let's say the feathers flew somewhere, you found it. It's all halal, tahir. And if it's tahir, there's no najasa here. It says tahirun ala sahih, according to more correct opinion. And the proof for this opinion is in the Quran, chapter 16, Surah Nahl, ayah 80. Allah tells us that He made for us, from the bounties of Allah, our homes and abode, and made for you out of hides of cattle tents to dwell therein, until Allah says, and He made their wool, their fur and their hair, furnishing and articles of convenience. Yani all of that is halal for you. Surah Nahl, ayah 80. So therefore, if it comes from L-cysteine, is derived from the feather of a duck or a goose or any bird or animal which is halal, it's halal. And so someone would say, here Allah mentions specifically the wool, fur and hair. But if someone wanted more specification, the fuqaha even mentioned the birds, the feathers. Just in case someone said, but it's wool. No, fur, feathers included. In Al-Mawsu' al-Fiqhiyya, you can find that. All of this is there. So therefore, if it comes from those sources, no problem. All right, so the first one is if it comes from a plant source, then there's no issue. If it's plant source or synthetic. Second one, it comes from an animal which is halal to eat. From the feathers of that animal, it's fur or wool, it's halal as well. So those two are there. The third one then is the one where is the issue, which is the human hair and pig or impure sources. And so before we mention what the correct or final conclusion is, what are some of the opinions out there about that? So some fuqaha, some jurists have ruled that it's haram to eat products that have L-cysteine from human hair or pig. For example, the HMA, the Halal Monitoring Authority, we mentioned before, they're the biggest group here in Toronto or in Canada. HMA, they have a post on their website or the Instagram, and they mention about L-cysteine, what is it? And they say, ruling, halal if obtained from synthetic materials, haram if obtained from other sources. And mutlaqan, it's the other sources, they didn't even clarify. If you go to islamqa.org, the Hanafi one, there's a different one. Some people don't know, islamqa.org, it's a Hanafi one. They say it's haram and they have a conclusion. I'll read what they said because they did a detailed research on it. So you have to understand, those people who hold that view, where did they get it from? Here's their conclusion. They say it's not permissible to consume products with L-cysteine if it comes from human hair because they argue the human hair and the human in general have been sanctified by Allah. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He made the human honored. وَلَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ. So we cannot be taking derivatives from humans. When they die, you can't take from their hair, etc., and then sell it and benefit from it. We'll get more to that in a second. They also said if it comes from pigs, then it's haram because it's a haram najas source. If it comes from a halal animal, then they say it's halal. And they conclude by saying that the one that comes from a haram source, like a pig, the problem is, even if you argued about istihala, the change, chemical change, we don't have proof it happens. It's not clear. Remember istihala, we said before, one of the two principles we used in the last 3 lessons. Istihala is a chemical change, or physical and chemical change of a product from one entity to another. So they said it's not guaranteed istihala happened here. You can't guarantee it. So the pig is haram and human hair source is haram. And truth be told, even most consumers are not happy with the human hair source. Because why would you want human hair in your food? So many people have raised the question, this is actually wrong. They should be unethical to put human hair in the food. So their conclusion then is, L-cysteine from human hair is haram, because the ayah in Surah Isra, chapter 17, verse 70, وَلَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ. And the fuqaha said, some of them, many of them, you can't buy and sell human byproducts or derivatives, hair, skin, because all humans are sanctified. And this is mentioned, and they mentioned Fathul Qadir, one of the Hanafi texts, it mentions this. So now, how do we respond to this if we say that it's not? Because the necessary conclusion behind what they said now is that bread is haram. This is what we're going to come to. And so some of you are already wondering, bread can become haram like this? It becomes more complicated because now we have to examine this issue that they mentioned. True, the ulama and the fuqaha, the jurists said it's not allowed to take derivatives. When some human being dies, you can't buy and sell the derivatives. The human being is sanctified. However, the Hanafis included agree, on all the different madhahib, that human beings are pure. So it's not an issue of najasa aslan. Human beings are pure, dead or alive. And this is the position of all the scholars, right? Or majority of madhahib. Because human beings, Allah exempted us from impurity. So the argument then is that it's not allowed to do that. And we agree, no one should be deriving these kind of byproducts or enzymes from them. The question now is, in our major companies, if L-cysteine is found in the bread that you already bought, the question now is not about, is it haram to take the enzyme from the source? The question is, it's already in the source now. It's in their final product. Can you eat it? So we have to separate the issues. Because if you told me it's haram to take it, I agree with you. But that doesn't mean now the bread is haram. Because what's the issue? What's the mas'ala we're talking about here? The L-cysteine from a haram source is already in the flour and baked in your bread. What's the hukm of the bread now? That's the question. And we always remind ourselves of the principle, hukm an shay, hukm on something, on anything, far'un an tasawwurihi. It's a subsidiary of conceptualizing the issue to begin with. We're not talking about taking it. We're talking about it's in it. So if you understand this, now the fuqaha and our councils in the Muslim world, they analyze this discussion. And the conclusion then is that L-cysteine from human source or pig source doesn't make the bread or the pastry haram. Anyone can guess why? What kind of principle? Yes? Istihala or istihlal? Or istihlak? Istihala or istihlak? One of the two. So which one is it? That's the question. We always mentioned before, istihala is hard to prove because chemically you need to go to a chemist or a lab. And this is the easy argument to say that we can't prove it and you can't negate it. So what's the correct or stronger argument? Istihlak. Istihlak, for those of us who were not here before, it means when you take a small amount of najasa, impurity, and put it into a large amount of pure substance, it becomes absorbed. It loses its taste, its color, and scent despite its presence in the food. It's called istihlak. This qa'idah is a very important one because most of the topics and enzymes end up there. It's very important. Otherwise, we're going to be logically concluding that bread is haram. And next topic we'll talk about maybe your milk is haram. And if you go more than that, you might want to leave the dars. If I keep going, if I mention what else could be haram. Because this becomes very difficult. Because these enzymes are everything. So here, now, our fuqaha, our council, Majma' Fiqhi, the Islamic Fiqh Academy. Right, so again, we mentioned this is a group of senior scholars all across the world gather, and they talk about these contemporary issues in the 9th Medical Fiqh Council discussion. And this is found in Majalla Majma' al-Fiqhi al-Islami, volume 10, page 1431. So it's a very big magazine of all the research that they did. They mention L-cysteine and cholesterol, which are derived from impure sources without undergoing a process of transformation, or istihala. It is permissible to use them in food and medicine in very small amounts that are absorbed, mustahlaka, into the dominant mixture that is lawful and pure. That's the conclusion. L-cysteine is permissible because it becomes absorbed into the bread, into the dough, and the final product. And the amount that's in it is very small, very, very small. So the conclusion then is, if it comes from human hair or pig sources, pig skin or big pig bristles, it's still halal. Okay, it's still halal. Now to add to this, to give you more assurance, because you might say, brother, I don't believe you, it's still doubtful. I'll give you added assurance. In Canada, almost all the L-lecithin comes from goose or duck. So you don't have to even worry about this. And this is one of the problems, some people, they take something from general and then they apply it to the specific. Some people, they say there's L-lecithin in the bagels in Tim Hortons. We tell them even Tim Hortons says that's not true. We have to be careful. Some people are spread these things and they don't do tathbeet. Majid was telling us earlier about that. If someone brings you reliable information, you have to take it. Otherwise, we have to investigate if it's right. So here, the Baking Association of Canada, this is supposed to be, their job is to deal with these issues. They say, the primary source of this amino acid is goose and duck feathers. However, human hair and swine bristles and swine hooves have also been identified as sources. These latter sources are not used in Canada. And they continue. This is from their website, 2019. And the reason why we're saying this, just in case someone is still under the impression that I'm not Hanafi. For example, we may not ascribe to the madhab Hanafi, we'll say even if we didn't, alhamdulillah, even this is information for us. So even if we take the view that it's haram to eat human source or human L-lecithin from human sources or pig sources, the reality it's not a reality in our society. Alhamdulillah, that gives us clarity. So the bottom line then is, it's halal, whether it comes from human hair. Again, it's wrong to take it from there, but if it was in there, it's halal. Halal if it's from pig source, halal from synthetic source, and halal from duck or geese, etc. Inshallah. So there's no need to be alarmed with your bread. Tayyib, inshallah, we move to the second one, which is lecithin. Lecithin, and this is another common enzyme we find. Lecithin is found, it's actually a fat that's taken from the body, or it can be found from soybeans, egg yolks, etc. Lecithin, L-E-C-I-T-H-I-N. And you often find it as an additive. It's used to separate products inside the goods that you're making. Mathalan, if you're baking something, or you're making a cream or something like this, it's used to separate products. Lecithin, it has a few following sources. Number 1, sunflower seeds. Number 2, eggs. Number 3, soybeans. And the last is animal fats / fish and the likes. So sunflower seeds, eggs, soybeans, animal fats, fish, and corn, but it's kind of the same as the other. You could say plants if you want that one. So lecithin, what is it? How often is it found in your food? It's quite found in actually a lot of your food. And you might find this particularly in dairy products or sweets like ice cream. Now lecithin, there's 2 types of it. You might find lecithin without any type of quality like descriptor, just lecithin, or soy lecithin. So we'll begin with soy lecithin. If it says soy lecithin, where do you think it came from? Anyone thinks? Where do you think it came from? Soybeans. Soybeans are halal. Is it recommended to eat soy for men? We're not going to say this, but they are halal. So a lot of now, even your milk, right? Skim milk, ice cream, it has soy lecithin. If it says soy lecithin, inshallah, halal, because the origin is soybeans. Some people have the question, is it healthy? That's a little bit different, right? But we're not talking about the health, we're talking about the ruling. So it's halal, soy lecithin. But back in the day, when many of us first came to this country, we found lecithin in everything. And at that time, lecithin was popular in milk. We'll get to that later, milk. And now you find this in the milk products, yogurts, ice creams, etc. Even baked goods. A lot of your candy and stuff have it too. So let's assume it comes from animal sources. Again, animal sources could be pig, it could be pig, it could be beef, it could be all this. The Permanent Committee, Al-Lajnatu Da'ima, Permanent Committee of Scholar Research and Ifta, and you can find this fatwa on ifta.gov.sa, English. Al-Ifta, Lajnatu Da'ima, was asked a question. My company prepares foods which contain unlawful beef products such as gelatin, glycerol, and lecithin. Do these substances make the foods prohibited? Okay, so they're asking three things. That's gelatin, we already covered that one. Glycerol, we'll take that one next time. This is more like to do with alcohol. And lecithin, this is our subject. Answer, the foods that contain prohibited substances such as parts of dead animals and prohibited meats of animals are unlawful to eat. Allah the Exalted says, forbidden to you for food or mayta, dead animals, which are not slaughtered. And this rule is applied if all the meat or part of it is from dead animals. So the conclusion then from the fatwa of the legend to Da'ima, if the lecithin comes from an animal source, which is haram, dead meat, pig, etc., then the lecithin is haram. And this is similar to the issue like of gelatin, because the permanent community also held the view that gelatin is haram, and we mentioned the other scholars who didn't agree with them on that. So as you can see, it's like a continuation. One ruling, they apply the same principles to another ruling. So this is lecithin, not soy lecithin, right? Lecithin. But other scholars, they hold different views. For example, one of the students of Shaykh al-Albani, he narrates from Shaykh al-Albani, rahimahullah, that the Shaykh was asked about lecithin placed in milk to the degree of 1 out of 1,000. And 0.1, not even percent. And the Shaykh, he mentioned the qa'idah, he said it's halal, Shaykh al-Albani. And this is important because back in the days around the 90s or down when many Muslims came to this country, this concern came. There's lecithin in the milk and lard in the soap. Many of you probably remember if you're older. These were big issues in the Muslim community. Lard in the soap, lecithin in the milk. So Muslims had a problem with this. Where did they get the soap and where did they get the milk? Subhanallah azim. These issues we can tell, especially for foreigners or newcomers, it's a big issue because we can't trust the market because it's not run by the Muslims. We don't know. So Shaykh, he says, Shaykh al-Bani, and this is his student quoting from him, he said this, because of the qa'idah, he mentioned a principle. So take this qa'idah fiqhiyya, principle in fiqh. qalilun najasaat ma'fuun an. It's a qa'idah. qalilun najasaat, small, minuscule amounts of impurities, ma'fuun an. They are pardoned in the Sharia. It's a very important qa'idah. And this principle helps us with many issues. qalilun najasat, small, minuscule amounts of impurities, ma'fuun an. It is forgiven or pardoned. And this principle, this qa'idah, fiqh maxim, was mentioned by the Hanafi scholars and also agreed to by Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah. He defended this principle as well. And what's the dalil for it? Because you can't have a qa'idah with no dalil, right? You can't just have some principles. Because we mentioned before in qawa'id fiqhiyya, in the fiqh maxims lessons, all qawa'id, they have original proofs. You can't just have a qa'id and no proof. So where's the proof? The proof is in the practice of al-istijmar. What is al-istijmar again? Anyone knows when you use the washroom? Yeah? Good. When you use the washroom, you have two choices. Water or dry products. Toilet paper. In the past, it was smooth stones. Anything like that. Obviously, that which is suitable to be used. Istijmar is not like water. Right? Istinja, with the water, it purifies. Istijmar, when you use it, is all the najasa gone? You could say most of it, but the ayn of najasa, it's not all gone. A little bit might be remaining, because that's the nature of istijmar. فَهُوَ مَعْفُوهُ. Ibn Taymiyyah says that's the deal. It's forgiven. That's why, have you ever noticed that when you use the water, and Muslims, we always prefer the water, because it's a stronger view to use it. If you did use istijmar, toilet paper, many people are not comfortable with it because of this problem. They say, I don't feel clean. فَهُوَ مَعْفُوهٌ عَنْهُ. If you do their best, what do you expect? It's not water. That's faida. Otherwise, can you imagine? The Sahaba were doing istijmar, and we would imagine the ayn and najasa is gone, but their traces are there. Ma'fu, it's forgiven. There's whatever small remnants, because it's not like water. That's the dalil amongst other dalils for this principle. Why is this important? It sounds like istihlak a little bit. In that small amounts of impurity, Allah forgave it. Unfortunately, if we didn't have this principle, we couldn't live comfortably with many things we find in our markets. So when we go to lecithin now, this is topic, look to the foods that have lecithin. Ice cream, yogurts, other things like this, candies. Sometimes they say soy, sometimes it doesn't say soy. We can't conclude we wouldn't want to conclude that it's all haram. Because first of all, we argue, even if it's lecithin without soy, we don't know the source. Right? We don't know if it's animal, or pork or beef. So if it just says lecithin, inshallah, it's from those things which are ma'foon an, small amount forgiven. Why? Because it is qaida qalilun najasaat ma'foon an. On top of this, is another principle you can take with you. The permanent committee, Al-Lajnatu Da'ima, permanent committee of Saudi Arabia, they were asked about somebody who buys products and they don't know what the ingredients are really, what they mean. For example, you bought a shampoo, deodorant, ice cream, etc. It has a bunch of chemicals. You don't know. Like right now, we're sitting in this class learning. What if we didn't know this? What's the asl if I don't know? And I already bought it. Okay, if I didn't know, I'm trying to avoid it. But what if all of them I don't know? This one has, that one has, they all have. And I bought it. Okay, I can't use it. It's still halal. The asl is al-at'imah is hil. They say if you don't know, it's still halal. But the other fatwa, they say it's better to avoid. But the problem with what I'm saying is that many ingredients that we have today, you might not know exactly what they are. Can we imagine then? We're going to tell the Muslims, haram, the bread, haram, ice cream, haram, and then we keep going, milk. And what happens then? You make for yourself haraj. مَا جَعَلَ اللَّهُ عَلَيْكُمْ فِي الدِّينِ مِنْ حَرَجٍ. There's no haraj in this religion. And I'm saying this because these qawaid, we live by them whether we like it or not. I'm sure most people, they already eat these products. But you see, now you know the rationale behind it. Because many people, and I'll add this as something that should be investigated, that when you don't have clarity about the food and drink, you start living in doubt and guilt. And this could negatively impact your iman and your psyche. Because you always think you're doing the dhunub. You eat something, make istighfar and tawbah for it, and what happens? You exhaust yourself. And it happens to people. They get exhausted because all these products, they think they're haram. The nafs, they want it, they eat it, they make tawbah. And what happens? They start beating on themselves like, I'm not a good Muslim. And this is a big problem. It affects Muslims already that we are struggling with our identity. So we need to have clarity because Islam came to make things clear. طيب, so the bottom line then, lecithin, if it's soy lecithin, inshallah, فهو halal. If it's lecithin itself, then that principle Shaykh Al-Albani rahimahullah mentioned takes its place, inshallah. And to add more comfort, most products now are soy lecithin. So maybe in the 90s, when there wasn't that many soy lecithin alternatives, more lecithin, now it's inshallah, it's halal. The next one I want to talk about is a product or an enzyme connected to our last week's discussion. It's called lipase. It's connected to pepsin and rennet. So when it comes to cheese making or dairy products, lipase is one of the enzymes. Usually either comes from the rennet or from the process when rennet's put into cheese, or it's equivalent to pepsin. And so the origin then is, it takes the same ruling. It's halal as well. We didn't mention it last week, but we mention it now. And inshallah, we'll mention one more connected to this, which is the topic of modified milk ingredients, MMI. Modified milk ingredients is an umbrella term for a series of milk, chemically enhanced or altered milk products. So you take milk and you chemically tweak it, you take things out of it and isolate them, or you add to it. So things like casein, or it can also include milk proteins or whey protein, either isolating it or modifying by putting extra things into it. The point is they chemically alter the milk until it's no longer milk. So the origin, it comes from milk. And the milk is then tampered with, it becomes something which is not milk. The HMA, the Halal Monitoring Association, their ruling is doubtful. Why? I don't know. Wallahu a'lam. They didn't mention, except that they said that you have to ask about its source. But after reading more about it, it becomes clear. It's like anything else. It's milk modified. The problem really is modified milk ingredients are not healthy. That's a debate. There's a discussion on it. And also deceptive, because almost all the milk you drink, or the ice cream that you eat, or any of the milk dairy products, it's not even milk. It's modified milk products. It's not even milk, they say. That's why the people are saying it's problematic. Why doubtful? I don't know why they mentioned that. But what is apparent, wallahu a'lam, is that the asl is still halal, because they modify the milk, and some have argued that they fortify it, make it better. Again, but we don't know where it would be impermissible, because we mentioned whey as being permissible, and we mentioned milk itself we know is permissible, so that one, wallahu a'lam, why they said that. To finish, we need to pay attention to one more advice, which is that these issues, as much as they're important, we need to understand that every time we learn about these qawa'id, obviously living by them, we need to also understand the alternative views that may exist. If someone has an alternative opinion about this issue, that's still fine. But what happens, again, we advise many Muslims are not clear on these issues. So one thing that we should be doing is clarifying to them why something is halal and something else is haram, because a lot of people they don't know. And once you learn something's halal, like now we learn Lecithin or L-cysteine, we do da'wah to the people and our families in a good way. Because if maybe you studied, you listened to the lesson, you found out, and you go and you apply. And maybe they don't agree with you. I have to have hikmah in the way that you advise and you explain. Because as I said, vast majority of Muslims, they don't know many of these issues. So they may think that it's haram. And they may see you eating this or you buying this, so you explain to them. Within the home as well, it's important to also have hikmah. For example, if somebody is very staunch on the opinion, for example, we discussed the issues before, or gelatin or rennet. Whatever mawqif, opinion someone holds in the end, our job is not to force them to take our opinion. The same way that we also respect them to have their opinion, because it's an issue of fiqh, adab al-ikhtilaf. And that's the last point I want to mention, because it's a difference of opinion with scholars on both sides. Our job is to know why we follow whatever opinion we follow, bi'ilm. And when you have the knowledge of it, then what do? You practice it, and you have rahmah for others. You clarify it properly. If they still don't agree, then everyone can follow what they want. Our job is not to make fitna by way of it. Because sometimes what happens is the second view, which is not known to people, you bring it to them, and they don't know, and now that becomes their adopted view. And later they may go back away from the view. But all our job is to remind. I'm saying that because we know many people are not familiar with these issues. So our job is not to go with this new knowledge you've now learned and go and you make fitna in your home, bring in all kind of products which some people think are mashbuh, are ambiguous, and then you say it's halal. What are you going to say about it? And then you're going to make a fitna in the house. فَذَكِّرْ إِنَّمَا أَنْتَ مُذَكِّرْ لَسْتَ عَلَيْهِمْ مُسَيْطِرْ. Just remember, our job, Allah says to the Messenger ﷺ, so by us, of course, we're less, remind them. For your only reminder, you cannot force them or strong arm them to agree. So our job is just to remind. But if you notice, somebody doesn't understand something, الخروج من الخلاف أولى. Getting out of the khilaf, staying away from it is أولى. It's always better. But that doesn't mean you don't have a right to practice your view. But you know, if I were to enforce this opinion without explaining it, call it fitna or problem, get out of that and just go with that which is agreed upon, so that people can have a better perception. Because at the end of the day, our job also as Muslims is to do da'wah and to do it bil-ilm wal-hikmah. Inshallah, we'll end with this much. Next week we will cover the remaining amounts of enzymes that are not mentioned. There's quite a bit of them, but I'll try to group them together. For example, emulsifiers, and whatever remains of them. Lecithin is an emulsifier actually. So there's others, we'll put them into an umbrella term, and a few other ones, so we can get to the non-meat derived enzymes or products, like topics like alcohol, ethanol, glycerol. These types, inshallah, we want to cover, inshallah. So we'll try to move in that direction. If anyone has any questions, inshallah, we'll take them. Otherwise, we'll end. Naam, Sheikh. So that's a good question. So pasteurized milk, we know, sometimes they may put any of these najasaat or impurities in a small amount, but the pasteurization involves the heating process in which this could either disappear or be heated away. So the idea is at the end, it's even better. Right? Inshallah, they will make it more likely to be halal if the case is that it's evaporated or disappeared. The problem is that usually that these products, when we talk about them, we're talking about them in initial stages of their use, when they're first put into it. But we obviously have to factor in the process that is done as the thing is being used. Means that, for example, if we have small amounts of L-cysteine or anything put into the original vat of milk, that's the issue that we're debating. What happens when it goes inside this? But then now, as the Sheikh mentions, what about when the process now is heated up or it goes to more? So this will also be something we'll talk about when it comes to alcohol additives into products, because the process when it goes through can also evaporate or remove. If this is the case, it makes it more, inshallah, more likely to be permissible. questioner says, what about products that have numerous enzymes? Can you still use istihlak? The principle of absorption means there are many products, many enzymes. So the question is, if all these enzymes that are put in there, if they're all used in minuscule amounts, then the answer is still yes, because the qa'idah is still standing. The problem obviously is that we're always talking about istihlak of najasaat, impure items. So for example, one enzyme has animal fat, or let's say pork, another one haram source, another one haram source. So all that put in, that is also not always likely. But let's assume it was the case. If there still remain with no athar of taste, scent or sight, then the origin istihlak is still there, because then they're small in their amount. And the hukum at the end of the day will be upon the final conclusion, which is, this particular item have the remnants, i.e. the effects of the pork or the najasa. Right? So obviously this is a problem, as we know too, because our food is fully full of these enzymes. So these principles, we need them, because if you were to investigate your food, you'll find too many sources of different enzymes. But inshallah, istihlak is still standing, because the qa'idah is proven, and also because we know that the effect is missing. This is the key. And it will become more apparent, inshallah, in discussion about alcohol or alcohol derivatives in the food. This one will come, inshallah, become clearer. Allahu a'lam. Yes.
What's again the difference between the qa'idah qalilun, najasaat, and afwan and istihlak?
So it's a good question. What is the difference between the two qa'idah, the qawa'id? One, the qa'idah istihlak, it means you take something which is najis. Istihlak means absorption, to be absorbed. So something which is najis is put into something which is pure, which is more in its amount, and the najis still remains. So baqa al-shay, it's still there, but the athar, the taste, wal-rih, and the scent, and the lawn has disappeared. So, but it's still there. That's called istihlak. Qalilun, najasaat, mahfu'an is similar in the sense that it is forgiven, pardon. But this one might be more clear in that sometimes the qalilun najasaat could be still seen. That's the difference, because we used istijmar as the example. Istijmar, the athar is actually present, whereas istihlak, the athar is gone. So you could say equivalent but slightly different, but inshallah they're all in the same idea.
This comes from istijmar?
Istijmar, yes.
So how about istijmar is used as an alternative if there's no water?
Exactly.
Could that same qa'idah be used, like say if there's an alternative to that enzyme?
So the good point, if someone could say istijmar is an alternative to istinja, but the correct opinion is not alternative, it's both allowed. So we say that if some fuqaha, they say it's better istinja than istijmar, some say jama', you do both, and some say istijmar is better. Imagine that, because in times of Sahaba, it was a sign of manhood to do istijmar. Some of them would take it down like this. But the point is, we couldn't do that. Right? And the idea also is that the problem we really have, if you want to be honest, the food industry is like the way it is not ideal. If we want to be honest, the problem is these things are being put in it like or not. Where in the Muslim countries, the difference is that some of these products have been removed altogether from the market. And inshallah, this will be the forward trend. If you look carefully now, the trend in North America is trying to follow like Europe. A lot of these things are getting out of the use. So we pray that they get out altogether. But right now, we're dealing with what is there. Wallahu a'lam. Yes.
Could it take a ruling of being impermissible or something to be avoided if it leads to harm in someone absorbing or taking organic food later on, or organic milk?
So afwan, repeat the question. I missed the first part.
Modified milk, or the likes of that could have an impact later on if a person were to take the natural source of it, such as, for example, raw milk. That's not milk that's not modified. Could it have a ruling of being impermissible if it leads to gharar?
It's a good question, because now we're only looking at these things from the legal rulings just as they are. But if we add the factor of harm, which is one of the things that make food haram, then this is a very good point. For example, if it's known that these modified milk products are going to harm you, and then as an alternative of, let's say, like raw milk, which is available to us, then obviously we have to go to that which is better. La darar wa dirar. And we'll also talk about later how the harmful foods is a qa'idah and principles, qawa'id, to deal with harmful foods. How much of it can you take, how much can you can't? So this is a good question, because right now we're not talking about the health issue. Because even now, just to give the idea, something could be halal based on what we were studying and still haram for somebody because of the issue of harm. harming them, it actually harms them particularly, or the harm is significant. So we'll, inshallah, add that maybe at the end of the lesson, we'll add this point, because it's very important to also remember, in Islam, we have a holistic opinion or view of the foods and drink. The origin, if something's halal, it means it's beneficial to the body and the deen. Tayyib, it means it's gained in the halal way. So Allah says in the Quran, you have to eat halalun tayyibah. So remember, halal means it's beneficial for your deen and your body, your badan. And in tayyib, you gained in the halal way, you didn't do it in the haram way. So we have to not forget that too, because I believe, and I'll finish with this point, but many people, when they talk about the meat issue that we discussed before, about the issue of meat, about slaughter, we cannot divorce the topic from the issue of ethical slaughter. Ethical slaughter is from Islam, to slaughter ethically. That is our manner of slaughter. Today, what is happening is people, they say, we're only ending up concluding that something's halal haram. We're not trying to find the solution, which is get ethical slaughter. And this then makes some Muslims, and I mentioned this before, some Muslims, they bring this into the conversation. So for example, they say, I'm not worried about if the meat is halal haram. I'm worried that it's harming the animal. I'm worried that it's unethical for its haram. And what do we say in response? That this issue, the hukum, has nothing right now to do with if the ethical nature is there or not, because that's a separate discussion. But we don't divorce it from Islam, because if you slaughtered Islamically correct, it is ethical. So we agree that what we have today of our food process is not ethical or it's harmful. But we're dealing with the reality. We're not talking about something which is not real. And lastly, this also brings some Muslims to turn to veganism and vegetarianism, because they think that it doesn't even matter if it's halal, it's harmful. It's against the spirit of Islam, the maqasid of deen. And really what they have done now is that they've moved away from what the Sahaba and Rasulullah used to understand and practice, toward accusation that the food that we're eating is haram, or Allah allowed something which is unethical, and this is dangerous. Right? So, but we're not going to be naive and say that, for example, soda is halal and that's it. Drink as much as if you want. We're not saying that. And we're going to get to that inshallah next time about that qaida as well, principles regarding those kind of things. For everything halal also has boundaries. Barakallahu feekum, subhanakallah bihamdika, ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk.